First up this morning, please welcome Nick Casey, Chief of Staff for Governor Jim Justice, who's been working literally night and day on the proposed budget. Nick, good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, Hoppy.
Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Nick, the proposed, I'll tell you what, before I get down into the meat and potatoes here,
yes.
Governor Jim Justice made a speech last week in Beckley, and I thought his comments were interesting. He said, first and foremost, the Depression is beyond belief. He said there are so many black holes that are just unbelievable. He said there are agencies in government that have money, that are agencies that are so blooming wasteful, it's just unbelievable. He said he really described a dire situation. In fact, he used the word dire 3 times. Is the governor finding out? Are you finding out that things are worse than you thought they were?
I think the governor understated it. Things are indeed worse than I ever thought they could be. It is amazing how the decline in tax revenues, whether it be from severance tax or from other places, in light of the government services, the way the government's operating. I mean, there's a huge differential between revenue and expenses. It's got to be balanced.
So it's worse than he thought it was when he was campaigning.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And part of that's because of I've lost track of my dates, but during the campaign, some of the revenue figures just bottomed out. They just went south. I mean, the severance tax is a great one to look at for reasons, I guess, due to the market. It just collapsed, and when it collapses, that takes out employment. When employment drops, that takes out personal income taxes. And when people don't have any money, that makes it more difficult for them to spend, so that takes out consumer sales taxes. So that whole daisy chain of changes that became rather dramatic and rather quick really impacted the budget, the current budget we're in now. And, boy, unless there's some change, it's going to impact us horribly as we go into this next budget.
Nick Casey, who is Governor Jim Justice's Chief of Staff, you've been working constantly on this budget. And so now, let's for general discussion purposes say that the general revenue portion of the budget is about $4 billion, give or take a few million bucks, about $4 billion. The projected shortfall anywhere from $400 to $500 million for next fiscal year, which is a gigantic amount. How deep, as you were putting together the budget with the governor, how deeply is this governor willing to go on cuts? Can you give me a number or a range?
Hoppy, it is. I can give you the range that I'm working on. The governor does have to make this decision. I'm working on a range that runs from $606 million all the way down to $390 million of cuts, or foregone expenditures, the way the budget's set up. Some things we just won't fund. They're not really cuts because they haven't been funded yet, but that's where I'm working on, because I'm on the budget side of it now. The governor's going to have to make a decision as to what magnitude of those are so tremendous that they cripple the government in a sense in some of the areas we work on. But that's the range I've been working in.
That's a big range, Nick. That's a big number. So you're saying, obviously, how deeply you would go on cuts, that's the governor's decision. That's his decision. But you're saying, as somebody who's putting together the budget, that you're working on a range of cuts of between $300 and $600 million in cuts. That's what you're working on.
That's correct.
That's a huge number.
It is huge. You see, and Governor Tomlin was able to cut out, I think, $600 million in 5 years. We're looking at numbers that are substantial in 1 year, and it's enormous. And this is after Governor Tomlin. I give him great credit. Governor Tomlin made a lot of cuts that were more percentage cuts across the board. The cuts we're looking at least that I'm going to propose to the governor, are not across-the-board type cuts. They are cuts of existing programs that just get massively affected if these cuts go through.
Can you characterize? I would imagine the obvious question would be, what are you going to cut? I would imagine you would be cautious about saying that today, but can you characterize those cuts?
Yeah, let me give you just an overview thing. You look at the nature of these cuts, the size, and you start to have to make some real difficult policy decisions. Do you cut for the seniors versus do you cut colleges that are educating the youth? Do you cut veterans versus do you cut health care services that may come through our Medicaid programs? It's that nature of cuts. It's almost to me it's a big policy issue where there's going to be enormous pain if these cuts go through, and it's just where is the there's no good place to make these. People are going to be dramatically affected. So the real question is, when you look at this, can you make the hard decision to say, take this terrible thing? Is education more important than our seniors? Or are seniors more important than education? Geez, is health care more important than education? I mean, it's that kind of dramatic policy decisions that are there, because unless you go and trim everybody back until they can't function at all, you're really talking about taking out whole areas of services, and so it's very, very difficult.
Obviously, it's very difficult, Nick. And Nick Casey's with us, Governor Justice, Chief of Staff, who's working on the budget, who says that he's going to propose to the governor a budget that would have cuts, or at least the idea of cuts, of between $300 and $600 million. Nick, if you're talking about those kind of cuts, I mean, I know from being around the budget a long time, you're talking about layoffs. You're talking about closing or eliminating certain agencies. You might be talking about closing colleges. You might be talking about a cut to higher education, and on and on and on. Is that fair for me to assume?
Hoppy, that's absolutely fair to assume. And when you talk about personnel and what that does, for each one of these cuts, we have our best estimates of how many positions that would entail. So if someone says, if this cut's the one we have to make, I can look out on my spreadsheet and say that's 108 full-time equivalents. I can look at other numbers and say that's different numbers, and that's 90 full-time equivalents. Pure personnel. I mean, the budget as it's designed. I mean, the state expenditures for a lot of the programming are they're human beings that are involved in that stuff. So it's just very, 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 very difficult to look at this and treat these are humans, versus numbers. But that's when you do it on the mathematics of the spreadsheet. That's if this has to go because we can't afford it, that means these people have to go with it. It's just tough.
Nick Casey's with us, Governor Justice, Chief of Staff. I'm really just allowing what you said to sink in, Nick, because I think this is momentous. This is gigantic. The size of cuts you're talking about. Now, since you say that you believe that you say that Governor Justice is finding out, and you too as well, that things are worse than you thought they were, does that mean that the administration is rethinking the whole no new taxes thing? Do you believe this governor will come in with major cuts and a tax increase to balance the budget?
Hoppy, I don't think it's possible given the communications we've had with the legislators, and I respect their opinions. They fought through this budget situation last year, which was difficult, but I really don't think it was a magnitude we're looking at now. And there is a very limited to no appetite for increases in taxes, fees, revenue increases, but they're basically taxes. And so there's a very, very limited, if any, appetite up there. So we're trying to work with them to say, look, these are cuts that we hate them, but we appreciate that they want to see what the cuts are going to be. And then I think that may set the stage for additional conversation to say, is this cut to a certain program such that we really have to preserve that program? Well, we can't. Well, are there other ways to do it? And then you might have the door open up on conversations on taxes. So we're trying to do that in a very open communication with folks so that we're no gotchas here. It's just this is bad, this is what we see. And I think, this is me personally, not the governor, but I think it does open the conversation to say, well, we don't want to do that. Well, if we don't have enough resources, we're going to have to consider some kind of changes in the revenue.
Yeah, I mean, that's the equation. Okay, this is what it is. If you don't want to do this, then that. I mean, that's
Correct.
How that works.
That's right, yeah.
So,
but I think at the end of the day, I cannot imagine that there's not going to still, no matter what happens, there's not going to be substantial cuts.
Yeah. And on that, and again, Nick, I don't want to put you in a tough spot of speaking for the governor, because he is the governor. He's his own mind. He can decide what to do. He can change his mind tomorrow. But if you're going to come in recommending to the governor, and you've obviously had extensive conversations with him about cuts of $300 to $600 million, do you believe this governor is willing to cut that much from the budget?
Hoppy, yes. I mean, constitutionally, we have to have a balanced budget. So, I mean, it's one of those circumstances where it's not like, do you want to do it? If to make the budget balance, certainly if let's just say there's no change in the revenue numbers. The economy doesn't improve this quickly. I mean, there's opportunity out there, but we're looking at basically the next 18 months or less. And let's say the economy can't swing that fast, then the cuts have to go. Unless there's revenue, what I call organic revenue, just the economy picks up, which would be great. That would help us to solve some of these things, but I think the governor has every ability to make these very difficult decisions on cuts, and we'll do it.
And anything else that you want the people of West Virginia to know about this process? Presumably, we'll find out more about it 1 week from Wednesday when the governor makes his State of the State address. Anything between now and then you want folks to know about this process?
And the only thing, these are heart-wrenching cuts. Again, these are not the low-hanging fruits. Don't buy any new cars forever. Okay, that's $2 million. We're talking about $300+ million worth of cuts. So it's the kind of things you see here are just going to really impact people dramatically, and there's just no good choices on these cuts at this stage of the game except to say they're going to be painful and they're going to impact people, and I don't know how to say it except it's a heavy heart that you even consider the kind of cuts we're looking at, but the Constitution says we have to balance, and we will balance.
Nick Casey, Governor Jim Justice's Chief of Staff. Nick, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you being with us, and I appreciate your candor. Thank you.